Good evening, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020, and this is my backup channel, but it's starting to become my main channel as we uh, get through the election and various crises resolve themselves. I am hoping that YouTube doesn't keep up their attitude of suppressing everything that I have to say and all the things I've said for the past 2 years. I hope they change their mind after the stress of trying to elect their candidate passes. I heard they were going to break up Twitter and all these social media, Facebook and everything. I suppose if Trump wins, because he'll just say, well, these are violating the free speech laws, and that Section 230 has got to go away. All right, well, good evening, Ospreys. And, wow, did I play the Ospreys? Let me see. Might as well play it again, right? They're always ready. Those guys love to sing. Yep, the singing Ospreys. Yeah, there's 5 of them, and I know they all say the same thing at the same time, but they're very good at what they do. They're just very specialized. Well, I'm getting toward the end of The Strength of the Wolf. I've skipped a number of great chapters about the French connection, about the Mexican connection. I read some of that, but as far as the Mexican and the nationalist Chinese connection, we covered that very thoroughly because that's so important to understanding what was going on in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as the elite set up their drug business to finance their special operations and use the FBN on the one hand to create the appearance of a big drug problem by busting a whole lot of small-time users and marijuana people, but on the other hand, using their position to protect and keep in business the great big pharma money. And we're talking about Bayer and all of the ones that are in the running for this vaccine, if they're still doing that. Hey, I saw something pretty encouraging today. It was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was an ad about this young actress person, and it was all about dancing in the post-pandemic, dancing after the pandemic is over, in the Wall Street Journal. So isn't that a great idea that the Wall Street Journal is foreseeing a time when the pandemic will be over? And after the stress of this election is done, maybe, that will be the end of it. Wall Street Journal, that's Rupert Murdoch talking to you. And, he talks for the big boys in London. All right, let me get my glasses on. So I'm moving forward past the Israeli connection, which is a great story, the PLO and connections that all of these Arab, Palestinian, and Israelis in the Middle East have to the heroin and opium roots. All documented very well and very interesting to read. I'm moving past that. Unfortunately, I'm just not going to be able to read all 500 pages of this wonderful book, but I want to concentrate now on the Golden Triangle. Chapter 26 on page 432. Yeah, there's a famous quote from Emma Goldman that's if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. I've always thought that was pretty ironic given the fact that this COVID revolution is keeping everybody from dancing, but yet, you know, the radical left is all for it. That's why it's not going to work because, you know, you can't dance. Just checking out your chat room comments. I'm always interested. Golden Triangle Enterprises. A quote from The Quiet American by Graham Greene. It was a superstition among them that a lover who smoked would always return, even from France. Pardon me. Robert Kennedy's vaunted war on crime was a faded memory on the 22nd of September 1966 when 13 major mafiosi were arrested for, quote, consorting with criminals at La Stella restaurant in Forest Hills, New York. Among those present were Carlo Gambino, the boss of bosses, Genovese family boss Tom Eboli, and his consigliere Mike Miranda, Profaci family boss Joe Colombo and his erstwhile rival Joe Gallo, Santo Trafficante, the mafia's narcotics manager, based in Tampa, and his close associate Carlos Marcello from Louisiana. After their release, the audacious hoods thumbed their collective nose at the law and imperiously invited the press to attend a meeting they held the following day. Several reasons have been given for this mini Appalachian, including the need to address the disruptive banana wars. Another reason concerned Joey Gallo, whose crew had helped New York Mayor John Lindsay quell race riots in Harlem that summer. Crazy Joe had acquired a measure of political protection as a result, and the Mafia mini-summit was convened to welcome him into the fold and seal a truce between him and Colombo. But the primary reason for the meeting was the need to organize the New World Narcotics Order through sleepers, meaning non-mafia members, like Carlo Zippo, by then the biggest distributor in New York. Though not represented at La Stella, the Lucchese family was also busy reorganizing its narcotics activities. On the 23rd of January 1967, emissaries from Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, the family's narcotics manager, met with Marcel Francisci in Paris. At Fouquet's restaurant, Francisci and Corallo's emissaries discussed the formation of a new narcotics syndicate. Using Francisci's contacts, most likely Jean Croce, and a mere 2 weeks after his arrest, Paul Mondolini, to move heroin from France through the Dominican Republic to the United States. Well, there's the Dominican Republic popping up, and they've always been, from Jean-Claude Duvalier, Baby Doc, and the obvious connections to organized crime, and also a playground for people like Senator Bob Martinez. Unraveling the New World Narcotics Order would test the skills of FBN agents beset by IRS investigations, subversion by the FBI and CIA, and an alliance between BDAC and Customs that was starting to trespass on Bureau operations overseas. The Bureau of Drug Addiction Control, the BDAC, that's something, I never heard of before this book, but they seem to have been given a great deal of the power that used to belong to the FBN. And it strikes me when I think of the name of a Bureau of Drug Addiction Control, that it sounds like the Centers for Disease Control. And to me, they're not saying eradication or anything like that. They're just saying control. So, in other words, I see a control, I see somebody twisting a knob saying we're going to let in this much but not anymore, as opposed to what we really should be doing is eliminating these diseases, including the disease of addiction. Yeah, this is Doug Valentine's term, New World Narcotics Order. All right. This latter problem began in June 1967 when BDAC boss John Finlater declared that the mafia was importing and distributing LSD and other pharmaceutical drugs, and then sent Agent Ed Anderson to London and Rome to conduct a joint investigation with U.S. Customs, Scotland Yard, and Italy's Ministry of Health. This international case focused on mafia boss banker Michele Sindona and others, quote, involved in the illicit movement of depressant, stimulant, and hallucinogenic drugs between Italy, the United States, and other European countries, unquote. We'll remember that Michele Sindona was one of the bankers in Operation Gladio, the book we read by Paul Williams. So it's all tied together. When Commissioner Henry Giordano heard of the BDAC venturing into Europe and was working with Customs, he went straight to Main Treasury and petitioned for redress of his grievances. But LBJ had already signed the FBN's death warrant, and Giordano's protestations fell on deaf ears. Making matters worse, Customs had formed a four-man narcotics unit in New York that was gathering significant French Connection-related intelligence and making major seizures. The Customs narcotics unit was connecting the dots in a way the FBN wasn't, and it wasn't sharing the picture it was forming with the Bureau. But it was revealing its information to the CIA's counterintelligence staff, who had helped put the unit together. The result was a considerable increase in the number of Customs informants, who worked by default for the CIA as well, inside Auguste Record's South American facet of the French Connection. Adding to the FBN's woes was the deluge of drug traffickers setting up shop in the Far East and exploiting America's escalating military involvement in Vietnam. Meyer Lansky's emissary, John Pullman, landed in Hong Kong in April 1965 and began buying into casinos and arranging for Filipino and Malaysian couriers to transport heroin to America through Canada, the Caribbean, Chile, and Paraguay. Other mob couriers moved morphine base from Hong Kong and Bangkok to Europe and America. Pardon me. Santo Trafficante was also establishing a foothold in the Far East through his emissary, Frank Furci. The son of a lieutenant in Traficante's Florida-based family, Furchi landed in South Vietnam in 1965 with the first wave of American troops. His patriotic purpose was to equip military social clubs with hamburgers, soft drinks, jukeboxes, and vending machines, while on the side he provided prostitutes and drugs to the troops. Although he was forced out of Saigon in 1967 for illegal currency transactions, Furchi resurrected his enterprise in Hong Kong with a group of retired Army sergeants. But this, too, was a typical mafia scam that cheated the clubs and their customers out of millions of dollars, and eventually became the focus of a congressional investigation, which was subverted by the same system of graft, bribes, and kickbacks that enabled Lansky and Traficante to grab a controlling chunk of the Far East rackets, with the blessings of military and CIA officials willing to do anything to win the war. This enduring accommodation with the Mafia was an extension of the Luciano Project, and in 1967, Albert Anastasia's son-in-law, Anthony Scotto, then vice president of the International Longshoremen's Association, would be called upon to send one of his henchmen to protect the port of Saigon from saboteurs and thieves who were stealing shiploads of cargo and selling it on the black market to the Viet Cong. This was not the full extent of the CIA's Faustian pact with the Mafia in Vietnam. The CIA believed that French President Charles de Gaulle was obstructing America's war effort through a network of resentful French landowners and businessmen. Supposedly, de Gaulle's motive was to improve France's standing with the Soviet Union and the PRC, both of whom were aiding the Vietnamese insurgents. James Angleton wanted to penetrate this SDECE apparatus, and in 1965 he sought to establish an independent CIA counterintelligence unit in Saigon. But the military rejected his initiative, so the CIA turned to its old Mafia allies to help fight an underground war against the French and their Corsican gangster accomplices. The CIA's major asset in this effort was Air Marshal Nguyen Cao Ky, a willing strongman it had recruited in the wake of the assassination of President Diem in November 1963. This bloody coup d'etat was supposed to win popular support for the Americans by replacing the repressive Catholic No regime with a Buddhist general. But the military men and politicians comprising the new government of Vietnam were more interested in making money than making war, and within a year the insurgents had seized control of the countryside. Taking matters into its own hands, the CIA in early 1965 arranged for Ky, then commander of the 1st Transport Group, to be appointed as the government of Vietnam's national security chief. Trained as a pilot in France and married to a French woman, Ky then placed his right-hand man, Air Force General Nguyen Ngoc Loan, also trained in France, in control of the law enforcement, intelligence, and security branches of the GVN. In return for having been granted such power, Ky awarded the CIA the right to establish the Revolutionary Development Program, where 15 years earlier SDECE had based its opium smuggling Operation X. The RD program was designed to win back the loyalty of Vietnamese in the countryside through a mixture of civic action, propaganda, and counter-terror operations. In July, Ky appointed General Nguyen Duc Thanh as RD minister, and in August 1965, where's my drum roll, Edward Lansdale, a CIA officer masquerading as an Air Force general, arrived as the CIA's liaison to General Tang and the RD program. Lansdale's resume included experience in an array of political and psychological warfare operations that involved drugs. In 1953, he had viewed the vast Laotian opium fields, and in 1955, he had chased the French out of Saigon and installed the Catholic Ngo regime. The Ngo regime's own drug smuggling operation was directed by Giem's brother Nu, an opium smoker, through his secret police chief, Dr. Tran. Key's first transportation group was at Dr. Tran Thuyen, and the first transportation group was at Thuyen's disposal and shuttled Thuyen's drug couriers between Laos and Saigon from 1956 until 1963. In 1960, Lansdale had investigated SDECE's involvement in drug smuggling, and in 1962, he'd employed drug smuggling mafiosi in the CIA's shadow war against Cuba and its KGB advisors. Possessed of a wild imagination, Lansdale had even proposed the introduction of cheap marijuana as a way of undermining Cuba's economy. In mid-1965, Lansdale assembled a team of American unconventional warfare experts and Filipino mercenaries to wage, under cover of the RD program, a secret war against French nationals supporting the insurgents. His arrival in Vietnam also occurred just as political upheavals forced the Corsican Airlines in Laos out of business. According to Professor Alfred McCoy, the first thing Lansdale did was to arrange a truce with the Corsican drug smugglers in Saigon. Lansdale's motive was to protect himself from anyone who might still be holding a grudge from the Sale Guerre of 1955. In return for a guarantee that he would not be harmed, Lansdale gave the Corsicans free passage and thus enabled them, their mafia associates, and a group of Vietnamese officials to control Saigon's lucrative drug market. Assisting Lansdale was his consigliere, Lucien Conan. The most adept member of Lansdale's team, Conan was born in Paris and raised in Missouri. He joined the OSS in 1940 and reportedly formed guerrilla groups in southern France using Corsican outlaws. In late 1944, he was transferred to OSS headquarters in Kunming, China, and fought alongside French Special Forces units conducting sabotage operations against the Japanese in northern Vietnam. After the war, Conan married a Vietnamese woman, and during this tumultuous period, he became acquainted with the Vietnamese gangsters, Kuomintang Chinese, SDEC and Sûreté officials, and Corsican policemen, perhaps even Paul Mondoloni, and seamen involved in Saigon's opium trade. He also hobnobbed with upscale business and political crowd that gathered at the Continental Hotel, including Monsieur Franchini, the influential owner. Conan joined the CIA shortly after its formation and in 1954 was assigned as Lansdale's deputy in Vietnam. His help was instrumental in snatching the divided nation away from the French and the nationalists led by Ho Chi Minh. In 1956, Conan joined a military intelligence unit operating in Germany and Luxembourg. And from 1960 through 1962, he trained Iranian special forces and in the opium-rich outlands of Iran. In 1962, he returned to South Vietnam as a floating emissary, reporting directly to the White House. Conan coached the cabal of military officers that murdered Diem and Nu. Afterwards, he helped recruit Catholic refugees from the No regime into top jobs in the police, intelligence, and security agencies of the de facto parallel government established by the CIA. Conan's knowledge and contacts were invaluable when Lansdale returned to Vietnam to manage the RD program and among his many functions, Conan served as the guardian angel of Lansdale's protege, Daniel Ellsberg. Sent to Vietnam by Defense Department to monitor the RD program, good-looking, fast-talking, quick-witted Daniel Ellsberg shared quarters with tall, swarthy Frank Scotton, a CIA officer working undercover with the U.S. Information Service. Scotton had created the RD program's motivational indoctrination component, a subtle form of brainwashing. Motivational indoctrination was the key to transforming average soldiers into the programmed assassins that operated secretly inside the RD program's civic action teams. Ellsberg began working with Scotton's counter-terror teams and participating in operations against the insurgency's political leaders. His photographic memory and pleasing personality also qualified him as a potential spy, and soon Conan and Scotton had introduced him into Saigon's swinging in-crowd. Ellsberg's mission was to engage Vietnam's leading political thinkers in conversation, and then report what they said directly to John Hart, the CIA station chief in Saigon. Then Ellsberg threw a wrench into the works. At a party at the fashionable Cercle Sportif, Scotton introduced Ellsberg to a beautiful Eurasian woman named Germaine. Ellsberg found her simply irresistible, although she was engaged to Michel Séguin, a Corsican opium trafficker. Germaine, however, shared Ellsberg's passion, and they began a torrid love affair that forced Séguin to defend his honor. After slipping into Ellsberg's villa late one night, he put a pistol to Ellsberg's head and warned him to stay away from his fiancée. According to Scotton and Conan, the only thing that saved Ellsberg's life was a promise they made to Séguin that if anyone hurt Ellsberg, they would wage a bloody vendetta against the Corsicans. Here the plot thickens. Lansdale claimed that he had nothing to do with the Corsicans after they reached their truce in 1965, but by another account the truce allowed the Corsicans, including presumably Séguin, to traffic in narcotics as long as they served as contact men for the CIA. In this role, the Corsicans kept their CIA case officers posted on the price, quality, and availability of narcotics. In this role, the truce also endowed them with free passage at a time when, according to McCoy, Marseille's heroin labs were turning from Turkish to Southeast Asian morphine base. After Professor McCoy published The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia in 1962 and exposed this truce, Conan wrote to McCoy's publisher and insisted that his meeting with the Corsicans was solely to resolve a problem caused by, quote, Ellsberg's peccadillos with the mistress of a Corsican. Conan did not say what the problem was, but one can infer that Ellsberg's affair with Germaine threatened to upset a very sensitive counterintelligence operation, in which the drug-smuggling Corsican contact men were serving as double agents and reporting on French nationals involved with the insurgents. Ellsberg told this writer that Conan and Scotton never intervened on his behalf and that their statements were CIA disinformation designed to impugn his character, because he leaked the Pentagon Papers in the summer of 1971 and thus inadvertently helped bring down the Nixon administration. He also insists that Lansdale had nothing to do with narcotics trafficking while in Vietnam. Ellsberg's assertions may be true, but what is important is that Lansdale and Conan knew that certain Corsicans in Saigon shipped morphine base to associates in Marseille. Although Conan, in his letter to Harper Row, denied having said so, McCoy quotes him as stating that it was impossible to completely stop the Corsicans from smuggling drugs, unless someone put the opium growers in Laos out of business. According to McCoy, that is why Conan and Lansdale did not pass on the information they had to the U.S. Bureau of Narcotics. CIA officers Lansdale and Conan knew that the Corsican drug smuggling in Vietnam relied on the CIA-protected opium growers in the Golden Triangle, but they didn't tell the FBN, which brings us back to the overarching fact discovered by FBN agent Bowman Taylor in Laos in 1963 that the CIA was not only protecting the opium growers in Laos, it was facilitating the drug trade in Vietnam. As FBN agent Al-Habib explained, Vietnam was off limits because, as Sal Vizzini observed, the CIA was flying opium to its warlords. The FBN knew about the CIA's involvement in the Hobbs case in 1964 and that Air America, aka Air Opium, was smuggling opium to Vietnamese officials. As we shall see, the FBN knew that top officials like Air Marshal Keyes' right-hand man, General Lone, were involved, as was Customs Director Nguyen Vinh Loc. As Habib noted in Chapter 21, Vietnamese customs had a warehouse full of confiscated opium that it sold, quote, out the back door. The CIA's complicity in the Southeast Asian drug trade was known to the FBN in 1965, and yet it listed only 2 Southeast Asian drug smugglers in its international book. Rolf Schmal, a Corsican later identified as SDECE agent Ange Simon-Pierre, the source in the Nebbia case, and Michel Libert, a Corsican residing in Saigon. And by never making public its knowledge of CIA drug smuggling, the FBN itself became complicit in the great conspiracy it had been searching for since its inception. Strategic Intelligence Network 118A. Not only was the CIA protecting the GVN's top drug smuggling politicians and generals, their Corsican accomplices, and its private army of opium growers in Laos, it was managing the caravan that delivered raw opium to the world's biggest opium market in Hui Se, Laos. CIA officer William Young helped to initiate this operation. The son of an American missionary in Burma, Young learned the local dialects before he mastered English. During the Second World War, his family was forced to move to Chiang Mai in northern Thailand, and afterwards Young's father taught Ambassador William Donovan about the intricacies of the region's opium business. Following a tour of duty with the U.S. Army in Germany, Young was recruited into the CIA and in 1958 was posted to Bangkok. When the CIA pretended to move its Kuomintang mercenaries out of Burma, he was reassigned to Chiang Mai and from there led a succession of CIA case officers to the strategically placed Laotian and Burmese villages that would eventually serve as agency bases. It was Young who introduced General Vang Pao, chief of the opium-growing Mao tribesmen, to Joe Hudicek, Pao's first official CIA case officer. From his headquarters at Long Ting, the CIA's major air base on the south side of the opium-rich plain of Jars, Vang Pao conscripted some 30,000 Mao tribesmen into a secret army to fight the Laotian communists and their Vietnamese allies. In exchange for selling his people as cannon fodder, he was allowed to make a fortune selling opium. Much of the brokering was done at the village of Hoi Sai in western Laos on the Thai border, in the heart of the opium-rich Golden Triangle formed by the borders of Burma, Thailand, and Laos. Vang Pao's frontman was the chieftain of the local Yao tribe, but behind the scenes Bill Young coordinated POW with the generals and politicians running the Laotian Opium Administration, as well as with 3 Kuomintang generals inside Burma. These generals operated clandestine CIA radio listening posts inside Burma and in return were allowed to move 90% of the opium that reached Huay Sai. It was a happy arrangement until October 1964 when the Chinese detonated an atomic bomb at Lop Nor. That seminal event signaled a need for better intelligence inside China and resulted in the CIA directing Bill Young to set up an intelligence network at Nam Yu, a few miles north of Huay Sai. The purpose of the 118A Strategic Intelligence Network was to use a Kuomintang opium caravan to insert agents inside China. The agents placed by Young in the caravan were his childhood friends, Lahu tribesmen Moody Tao and Isaac Lee. Young equipped them with the best CIA cameras, and while in China they photographed Chinese engineers building a road towards the Thai border, as well as the soldiers massing along it. Knowing the number and location of these Chinese troops helped the CIA plot a strategy for fighting the Vietnam War. Once the 118A network was up and running, Young turned it over to CIA officer Lou Ojibwe, and after Ojibwe was killed in the summer of 1968, Anthony Poshepny took charge. A Marine veteran who had served with the CIA in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Tibet, quote, Tony Poe, was the balding, robust model for Marlon Brando's Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. He also served as a father figure to the junior CIA officers he commanded in the savage jungles of Laos. In an interview with the author, Poe said he hated Vang Pao because he was selling guns to the communists. But Poe was a company man, and he remained silent and dutifully made sure that the CIA's share of opium was delivered from Nam Yu to the airfield at Huay Sai. The opium was packed in oil drums, loaded on CIA C-47s, flown by Taiwanese mercenaries to the Gulf of Siam, and then dropped into the sea and picked up by accomplices in sampans waiting at specified coordinates. The people on the sampans ferried the drugs to Hong Kong, where the opium was cooked into heroin by Kuomintang chemists and then sold to mafiosi. As described by Young and Poe, this was the CIA's private channel to its old Luciano Project partners in Hong Kong. Albert Habib, in a memorandum dated the 27th of January 1966, cited CIA officer Don Whitaker as confirming that opium drums were dropped from planes originating in Laos to boats in the Gulf of Siam. Whitaker identified the chemist in Huay Sai and fingered the local Yao leaders as the opium suppliers. By 1966, when Agent Doug Chandler arrived in Bangkok from New Orleans, the existence of the CIA's 118A opium caravan was also known to the FBN. As Chandler recalls, an interpreter took me to meet a Burmese warlord in Chiang Mai. Speaking perfect English, the warlord said he was a Michigan State graduate and the grandson of the King of Burma. Then he invited me to travel with the caravan that brought opium back from Burma. Chandler pauses, quote, When I sent the information to the CIA, they looked away, and when I told the embassy, they flipped out. We had agents in the caravan who knew where the Kuomintang heroin labs were located, but the Kuomintang was a uniformed army equipped with modern weapons, so the Thai government left them alone. Meanwhile, Thai and Vietnamese officials were buying opium at Huay Sai, as were Corsicans and CIA renegades working for Air America and yet another CIA airline, Continental Air, which had a State Department contract to fly food and supplies to the Yao in Hue Sai. Also involved with Prime Minister Suvarnabhumi's son, Panya, who built a Pepsi-Cola bottling plant in Vientiane, Laos, with U.S. State Department support. Better than the real thing, the plant served both as a cover for buying the chemical precursors necessary for converting opium into heroin and as a money laundry for Vang Pao's profits. Well, I think I'm about halfway through this chapter, and it's probably a good place for me to stop, it being a Friday night, and been a very exciting week here at McDuff_2020 channel. I'm so glad to have you all with me. 50 people watching right now, and I think, you know, the more we study this business about Laos and Vang Pao, and we understand that the CIA was, as a cover story, trying to win the war in Vietnam, but in reality, I think they were just using the whole thing as a way to finance their operations. You know, at the expense of how many lives, both Mao and Yao and American and French and Vietnamese, and, you know, that's just the way they are. They don't care. To them, it's winner take all and the strength of the wolf. Kevin Timmer, always great to have you with us. Kathy Sue, thank you, my dear, for your service as a wrench and as a good friend over many, many, many shows so far. And I hope we have many more together. Have a good evening, everybody. Thanks for being with us here. And I do appreciate very much the Patreon. If you haven't joined it, do consider, please, supporting the channel. A little bit from each of you goes a long, long way, and it really helps.